Welcome to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the place where you can learn how to create a dental practice and a business life that you love. Listen in with Dr. David Moffet as he interviews successful entrepreneurs and successful business people and successful dentists as they share their business successes, their stories, and their breakthrough ideas, sharing pearls of wisdom that you can take back to your practice and implement immediately so that you can have that great practice with more patients, higher profits, and less stress. This is the podcast where great dental practices meet with successful business processes. Thanks for tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast, the podcast where thought leaders, industry experts, and thriving practice owners reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies that will help you grow your dental practice faster. Now, here's your host, Dr. David Moffet.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Moffet. I'm in Burrawang in New South Wales in Australia. It gives me great pleasure to be talking to Thomas Passalacqua, who's in Long Island, New York, where it is actually yesterday compared to today. For me, it's 12:50 on Tuesday afternoon. And Thomas, what time is it there in New York?
Nearly 9 p.m. in New York.
My goodness, that's I bet it's cold. Have you got snow?
We did. We lost it right before the holiday, but we should get
It'll
it.
be back.
Yeah. Winter lasts up until March for us, so it's cold though.
Yeah. I'll bet. Yeah, I did have a New Year in New York a while back, and we got a little bit of snow on that. And I'd had snow another time in my visit. I think I've been to New York a few times, maybe 10 or 12. Now, Thomas, I actually got to meet you attending I guess it was an online discussion, and you were one of the panelists there. The discussion was very much based around customer service, and I thought that what you had to say was very, very important. But even in that short time since that broadcast, you've actually changed your role slightly. So you are now an independent business operator as a coach, professional and leadership development, working with primarily the dental profession, because you had been working within the dental space for a number of years. So you've obviously seen a need for what is your passion and a benefit for those people who use your services. So we'll talk about the customer service, but first, tell me about the need for, I guess, focus and leadership, which is often something that you're teaching dentists and business owners, something that they don't learn before they get into the business. Dentistry, right, especially, these things are never taught at dental school. So what do you recognize in terms of when you meet dentists that they have a need? Because I guess it's hard sometimes for dentists to even think they have a need. They often think, it's like learning to swim. But dentist says, I can work it out myself, which is not really the best way to do it. So you're the coach who helps them to hone in on the problem and then work out the best way out of that. Is that correct? Is that a good summation?
Yeah, pretty good summation, David. And thank you so much for having me on, today, yesterday, tonight, this morning. I have been in dental about 10 years now, and I started my career as a teacher. So years ago, I found myself helping my fellow classmates in high school just with being athletes. And that led me to wanting to pursue a career as an educator because I enjoyed helping people. But then I realized after a number of years, traditional education wasn't a space I wanted to necessarily stay in for 30-something years. So I wanted to challenge myself into a different field. And I found myself in a sales role for a dental company in New York. But did fairly well with that. And I started to train and mentor other sales reps. And I, again, really enjoyed helping other people to grow and to kind of navigate their challenges to hone their craft. But then an opportunity came up to work for a group practice. Up just until recently, like you mentioned, I was at a group practice helping them to grow their company. But I always wanted to get back to that core drive in me, was helping others. So I combined my education skills, my passion for helping people, and my experience in the dental industry, and created my coaching business, which is called Ascend Professional Pathways. And I've been a certified executive coach for the last year, and I am tapping into my network of clinical doctors, administrative staff, but as well as business owners and ambitious professionals just within the industry of dental to help them navigate leadership, professional development, sales training, teamwork, collaboration, and things like that. And to your point, a lot of the shared commonality between all of these individuals I'm working with is more of the emotional side of leadership, of running a business, operating a dental practice. So most of what I focus on is helping a leader or a business owner navigate the emotional side of being on the edge of their comfort zone when they are trying to grow or launching, something or trying to level up. There's a lot of unclarity or uncertainty and fears that come along with that. So my job is to try to help ground that individual or that team in order to focus on what's the most important aspects. How do you get yourself rooted in fact and objective thinking versus getting your emotions to take over and kind of keeping you spiraling?
Well, interesting that you mentioned that right at the end because as a coach myself for dental practices, it often gets my back up when the dentist says to me, I ask them a question and they go, well, I think or I feel. And I said, no, we've got to go away from thinking and feeling. We've got to look at data first. When I say, how many new patients do you get a month? And they'll say, if the number ends in 0, I know they don't know. And it's like, what's your turnover per month? Well, if it ends in 4 zeros, I know they don't know. So let's get into the facts. So, because once we have rational data, then we can make rational decisions. As you said, if emotional data, I think, even this morning, somebody said to me, I think this is what she meant. I said, well, did you ask her? And they said, no. I said, well, then we just got to disregard what you think because we've got to go back and find out what did you mean when you say that? How do you get that thought process into your clients? Because obviously the more they can think logically about the decisions they have to make, the easier it becomes because the processes then become more habitual rather than emotional, I get.
Yeah. Yeah. No, good point. So a couple of things that would help in getting them rooted in fact and information. One is truly identifying what are you trying to assess. So it's really refining the goal or the objective of what are you even trying to measure in the first place? Is it just turnover or new patients? Well, can you get more specific? How granular can you get with, well, what type of patients for what type of procedures and what type of time of the year, staff turnover or, treatment acceptance? Like, can you get as specific as possible? Because then that allows you to hone in on those questions to produce the needed answer in that entire system, right? So that would be step one. Two would then be identify what are the aspects of that question that you actually can influence. So is it just I feel a certain way? Well, what are the aspects that influence that emotion? Trying to identify actions, behaviors, and feedback in order to get yourself kind of pausing and just focusing a bit more. So once you take the space and identifying the goal and looking at the actual behaviors and actions, it then starts to ground you and separate that emotional kind of ambiguity of the situation you're in.
It's again, you're opening up a whole chain of questions. One of the big issues with running a dental practice is that you have the dentist owner, male or female, and then you have a primarily female staff as well. And then there's the expectation of, are they, well, back when I became a dentist, people went into dentistry as a career, dental assistant, dental practice manager, dental receptionist. It was a lifetime career. But now people are coming from school and they are still looking at dentistry as a stepping stone to something that they haven't found yet. And that can be really difficult as a dentist owning a business. You mentioned staff turnover. Is staff turnover bad? Because at the other end of the spectrum, there's low staff turnover, but that may be staff that are very comfortable and not very driven for production as well. How do you get that balance then?
I think it goes back to the question I just answered. What are you trying to assess? So
Yes.
if you are identifying or looking at turnover, well, what's the type of practice that you have? Are the staff that's turning over, is that a challenge to you, or it might not necessarily matter if it's supporting a different type of role that your practice is trying to uphold. You bring up a good point of, on the other side of turnover, you might have the complacency issue to where you're kind of, operating at a certain level. But again, is the goal of the practice to just be stable and serve the community and just have, consistency? Great. Or is your goal to grow and hit a certain number or hit a certain size or a certain capacity? With growth does come a little bit more of a volatile trend, which might induce some more turnover, but at the same time, the goal of the practice is to get to a certain level. So yeah, I would say try to identify if turnover or any of the challenges that a practice is facing is the true benchmark that you're trying to assess of the quality and health of the practice, or is it a byproduct of what you're trying to do? I do think it really comes down to the lead doctor or the owner to identify what is the goal and the purpose of the practice.
Well, great question, because a great comment, because the event that I saw you speaking on was talking primarily about customer service, which is when you talk dentistry and customer service, one, when you talk it to dentists, most of them go, why? I'm a dentist. I do great dentistry. People will come because I do great dentistry or I've got lots of certificates. And two, the public don't even perceive dentistry as a service industry. It's something that they would much rather not do. It's a grudge buy. Dentistry is a grudge buy. They would much rather risk another 6 months on bald tires than go to the dentist. It's in that same category. And so when dentistry looks at being a service, that can actually be a reason for staff turnover, because the staff actually may not want to learn the people skills that create a great service environment. What's the benefit of having a dental practice that's a great service environment? Well, if it's more about the relationship than about the product, then people are going to come because they like the people who work there and they find those people interested in them and interesting to talk to. And it's more, well, the dentistry is just what I get done at the time, but I'm in a friendly environment. And so there's the end product of customer service.
Mhm.
And once customer service is established as something that your practice delivers, then it kind of also tends to make price less relevant, even to a point where price can be irrelevant. And that's really, really powerful for dentists who grasp that. But you would know this, and I use this example. My wife would never change nail ladies on price. And the guy mowing my lawn, I'm just happy he does a great job. I don't care what the guy over the road is paying his lawnmower. This guy's doing a great job, taking photos of my lawn and putting them on Instagram. My pool cleaner, same thing. Back in the day when I had a pool in Sydney, I waited for a vacancy to get a pool cleaner because the last bloke had let me down. So price does become irrelevant if the service is great, if the relationship is there. And a lot of dentists don't grasp that. They just think, I get more degrees, people will think I'm smarter. But if the service is bad, then people will go elsewhere. So I guess it's a hidden thing that, again, not taught in dental school, probably taught more in business school about customer service than
Right.
dentistry. But the books are there,
Right. And I
a
think a
library
lot
card.
of,
Sorry, a
yeah, I
library
think,
card is free. People can get a library card and borrow books for free. Education is free. So why don't people do that?
yeah, and they hear it from their colleagues as well, right? Dental is a very tight community, especially with continuing education. So practice owners do interact with others and they hear these sentiments. And I think you bring up a really good point of, if the customer service is good, it actually produces the trust and reliability. And that's like the crux of the customer service and the culture and the interaction and the experience that the patient then feels, which allows them to come back year after year, and where price and kind of the scope of the business side of things isn't as important, because you're coming to a consistent environment. You have the relationships with the doctors, with the staff. You trust that they're going to do the best by the patient. The treatment is top notch and it's reliable. You could refer family and friends and they'll get the same treatment. So it's also repeatable. So once you have that kind of climate established, the business takes care of itself as well as the clinical culture as well. But it has to be intentional. I don't know if that happens arbitrarily, but I do think practice leaders who are aware of developing that culture, of trust, reliability, of customer service, they see the benefits. But if it's not something that's top of mind, it might not be as prevalent in that type of practice.
It's an interesting philosophy, and it's one I learned later in my business ownership. I knew I was doing good service, but I didn't have processes.
Mm,
And I thought, well, how do I learn processes without having to adapt them from big business? The models of Disney and Four Seasons and Ritz Carlton. How do I adapt their processes? And really, what I found was I found somebody who taught those businesses, who then taught small business, and it was just a matter of having that framework of how a business should operate and the principles of service, and then putting the stuff I was doing and then filling in the gaps. And it's because it's not about just, as you mentioned, it's about having a process and a logical process. It's not just about saying please and thank you now and then. It's about going above and beyond. And you don't have to go that much better, because everybody who's doing average are still failing a number of times. So it's
mm,
easy to stand out by just being a little better, but being consistently better.
right.
And that then requires a mindset shift, which comes back to what you're doing with the owner, and then hiring the team that then share that mindset. And that's the hard part, isn't it? You've got to gather the right people around you. It's easier to employ nice people than to train people to be nice. You can train them, but I think niceness comes from, I guess, upbringing and environment. That's also where bad children come from too. It's either hereditary, hereditary or environment why they're
Nature
bad.
versus nurture, all of that. Yeah. But yeah, you bring up a good point too, is that consistency piece. It's like, being an athlete or, trying to get into shape or being healthy. Most programs work, and you can find there's a variety of different programs, different philosophies, but if you find one that aligns with your style and aligns with the team style, it's that consistency piece that almost gets overlooked. Sometimes it could be expecting results too soon without truly establishing the groundwork, or expecting things to change on a rapid level. It's not giving enough time. So when I was helping fellow athletes, get healthier, I always said it doesn't necessarily matter your approach. It just matters how consistent you are, because then it goes back to that data piece. What are you tracking? Because if you're not truly tracking every aspect, you don't know what to adjust in order to stay on course, amplify, or readjust. So it's trying to be as consistent as possible and limit the variables that change, which then kind of produces the goals that you want to manifest. So I would say, yeah, there's a variety of different programs and styles and philosophies of how to provide customer service, manage your team, establish a practice, but it's being consistent and it's tracking. And then that will give you the information needed in order to adjust, which then separates that emotional component or the feelings component or the variables that might affect and influence the system that's out of your control. So those are kind of like the fundamental aspects that I try to get, business owners to think about.
It's so important. It's measure, test, measure, test, measure, test. You see what we can do. If that creates a positive result, can we create that in a quicker time, or do we
Right.
just keep it at the same, knowing that it is going to still create an improvement? Sport is a great example of what can be applied to business. You've only got to look at that. You find the John Wooden books in business at the bookstore. They're not in the sports part. They're always in the business part. There's so many phrases, there's sayings. In fact, I was just looking up one the other day to remind somebody else about practice. Ed McCauley, I think he was a basketball player, who
Okay.
says that you must always practice. He says, because if you don't, somewhere, someday, I may have it slightly wrong, somewhere, someday, you'll meet somebody who is practicing, and when you meet them, they will win. And so, a sporting team doesn't turn up at the venue, at the football field, and say, right, who are we playing today? They've had a week to prepare for that game, to look at the weaknesses and the strengths, and how are they going to adapt what they do to get the result, which is a win for their fans. And so we've got to do that in running a business. How do we prepare for the patients that we have that we're attracting generally. If we're trying to attract a broad range of patients, it's a lot harder than if we're trying to attract a narrow range of people who are our ideal sort of patient. So sometimes I think dentists just think, well, everybody's got teeth and everybody's got a credit card. Let me do my business. But that's really, really hard. And it can beat you up at the end of the week,
Right.
month, year, lifetime if you don't focus on what is going to produce the result and also be an enjoyable pathway in doing that for yourself, mentally and physically.
Yeah, I think it goes to how you're marketing and kind of establishing the business as a community asset. Because if you do establish your practice, yes, you will of course take any patient that walks into the door, any type of patient, demographic, stature, clinical, challenge. You will of course treat them. But to establish your practice as a business and market that business to try to make it a viable business is a completely different story. So yes, it's ideal to establish that philosophy of our practice specializes in whatever philosophy, clinical philosophy or, identifying our ideal customer or patient because these are our services that we excel in. And then that will then attract and align with the most viable group of individuals, patients to come in and support that thriving ecosystem of a clinical practice and business. So it is a kind of a two-sided equation there to where, yeah, you would, of course you'll treat any patient, but to market and grow your business, you have to be a little bit more specific and targeted because that's those again, that again lends to what are the aspects you're tracking and measuring to produce that result that you want.
When you meet a dentist, do you start analyzing in your mind what are their weaknesses and the point is, are you trying to find their weaknesses? Their weaknesses are there. Every dentist has a need for improvement, like every golfer has a need for improvement.
Yeah, it's less on like identifying the weakness. I look at two things. One is amplifying your strengths. So what are
Yes.
you naturally good at that you almost take for granted or don't put much attention on just because it's already there innate within somebody. Identifying your strengths, leaning on them and amplifying them so you get better at what you're naturally better at. So that would be one aspect of let's reproduce those attributes that are already working in your favor. And two, I wouldn't say weaknesses, I would say areas of improvement,
Like that.
but relevant areas of improvement. So what are the aspects of leadership that you can improve on? Communication, aligning goals with your team, establishing goals. Is it a resource issue? Or do you have to have, gather knowledge about, business acumen or what have you? So identifying what you actually need and then figuring out relevant and effective ways to implement that change, tracking the progress, and then repeating what's working and kind of readjusting what's not working.
Well, you just described what a sportsman does.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar, I believe.
It's funny because I can remember hearing golf pros saying, when they turn up and practice before they hit off in a 4-round tournament, they'll start hitting and they go, okay, well, today I seem to be fading the ball. And then the next day they might be drawing the ball. What they do is they work with what they're doing at the time. They don't try and fix the fade or fix the draw. They just say, all right, I'll fix that after today. I've got to do my work using, trying to manage this so I get the result I want. And that's important because in business, you'll find that people know they've got a weakness, but they just blunder on sometimes without seeking help, without trying to help themselves, knowing that some of their um, areas of improvement that they need will actually help them get a better result in their business. Dentists, especially.
If the desire is there too. Again, not every practice owner or every professional I work with has that desire to improve. Some are fine the way things are and they're happy and that's it. But if you're truly ambitious and you want to get to that next level or grow your practice to a new level, or if you're a business owner and you want to scale or start a business, and you have that ambition, but you might not know the first step to take or what step to take next. That's another situation. So the individual or team has to have that desire to improve or to grow or to change because that's what's going to put not just the motivation but the purpose behind all of the interventions that we're working on.
It's interesting because the mindset behind I'm okay with what I'm doing in dentistry, I often see that those dentists aren't doing like that might be okay in their head, but they're not providing the best dentistry even for their
Hmm.
patients. And and that's because they've settled on a a mode of practice. I just want to do fillings. I don't want to do crowns, which crowns protect teeth that are heavily filled. And they say, oh no, I'd rather patch it. So I've seen practices where patients are just, oh, I've broken another bit of tooth. I'll see the dentist at the checkup and he'll fix it up then. And that, not this is, if you've broken your arm, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to the doctor in a month. I'll get a look at my arm then. It's educating, and I think the tragedy of what I just described is that that's a large percentage. That's a big chunk of the dental profession actually practice what they are comfortable with, and it's not
Mm.
the best for the public. And so, if you're a patient of that dentist, you're actually being underserviced because that's the dentist mindset, and he doesn't advertise. There's always a sign, we do aligners, we do crown, we do veneers, we do cosmetic dentistry. But there's never a sign that says, we just do patches, we just do average dentistry. And so the population suffers. And yet dentists think that's okay. That wouldn't be okay in another part of the medical field if it was your wife or your children that needed exceptional care in a
Mm.
certain situation. So
Interesting. Yeah.
I find getting, sometimes dentistry becomes the population of dentists, as you said, peer review can often be, if somebody wants to be an achiever in dentistry, their mates go, oh, you don't want to do that. And so they're kind of brought back to
Mm.
the mode of average or worse still, and take it out of dentistry at the dinner table and somebody says they want to do something or out with friends and they say, oh, I'm going to do this. And they go, oh, you don't want to do that because they fear they're going to lose their friend as well. If they succeed, they won't want to mix with the average people anymore. And so there's all these things that go on in the
Yeah.
mind of a learner.
Yeah, interesting thought there of the average, because there's safety in that average, right? There's a
Mm.
lot of like-minded individuals or amongst the community that say, if we just stay all at this level, we're all going to be okay. And it's sometimes, unfortunately, when you try to break above that, if you are ambitious and you have higher aspirations for yourself or for practice or business, what have you, you might get those thoughts of, what is he trying to do? Like, no, come back to our level, right? Like, come back to where it's reality. Like, you don't want to risk anything. But at the same time, I don't think anyone establishes a successful passion unless you do risk breaking free of that average complacency or that average mediocrity. And I think that's the sacrifice a lot of ambitious people are willing to make is, I have to kind of shed certain parts of what I think society or the average people around me expect because I want to break through that. I have higher aspirations. I want to go beyond, but you might not get the collective to support you in that. So there is an interesting, and I've read about that a couple times. It's an interesting sentiment.
Yeah, we discussed before we started recording about Jim Rohn. I think it was him who said, how tall does a tree grow? It grows as tall as it can. But in the human race, some people just put ceilings on themselves.
Mm.
And sometimes that's sad. Sometimes for a coach, when you know that there is a potential and people say, "Oh, I'm happy with what I've got," it's difficult to accept, but you could be so much better. You have the ability to be so much better. How do we do that? Take a musician, take a child learning an instrument. Occasionally a child will turn up for music lessons and they can write music and the music teacher can't even write music. And so should the music teacher encourage that child to write music? Of course they can, because what's the benefit for society if that child becomes a successful composer
Right.
of anything, even a composer of a jingle for a product that people will buy, better than if they never became a composer. So again, it's
Right.
that, how tall will a tree grow? As tall as it can. And how do we encourage a tree to grow? With more water, more fertilizer, and the best conditions. And we stake them when they're young. How do we create that in people? Because you've seen it. You've worked in enough
Absolutely. I've
businesses where
lived my own
you are,
experience of,
you are that person. Yes.
yes, years ago, I've felt so restricted. I felt so limited And I had that internal calling, that desire to do more. And I knew I had more to offer the world, but there was somebody in my way and there were excuses in my way. And it was all at my hand. It was all my doing, where for whatever reason, I had these barriers saying, "Oh, I can't do that." Any aspiration I had was immediately answered with an excuse or a reason I believed I couldn't or shouldn't pursue something bigger and better. And it's taken me a long time to overcome that. But I hit a breaking point and I said, "This isn't working for me anymore. I have to try something different." So going back to what I was talking about earlier is, okay, let me identify all the tangible aspects I can influence to try to get myself to grow professionally or personally. And let me completely separate my emotions, because my emotions weren't helping me at that point. They were getting in the way. So I had to get as objective as possible. And then once you start making some small progress, all based on objectionable actions to get you towards a goal, and you realize, oh, I can be slightly successful. Let me keep trying. And then before you know it, you're actually making progress. And then that starts creating an upward spiral to where your confidence starts to improve. You're figuring out solutions. You're getting better at being resourceful, and you're accomplishing tasks that you initially believed you couldn't. And now you're proving your old self wrong. And then all of a sudden now you're achieving what you once thought was so out of reach. And that's a lot of what I work with a lot of the business owners currently in my coaching practice, because many of them have these self-inflicted barriers and restrictions that they put on themselves, either based out of fear, uncertainty, doubts, risking criticism, or just being afraid of what does that growth really look like. So that, I mean, it's a phenomenal experience, and I think it's all too common.
What was it exactly that was holding you back that you then changed? You know, what became the desire to, what was the desire to improve that overrode your fears? It's a recognition. You know, how did you come to that, come to God moment?
It was purpose. For me, it was purpose. It was doing something truly aligned with my values as a person and doing something purposeful and meaningful in my life. And I wasn't going to find that with any role that I was in, or just haphazardly falling into. I had to create it. And as long as I stayed true to wanting to fulfill that purpose, and for me, that purpose was helping other people. As long as I followed that North Star, everything started to fall into place. And then I developed a system based on that experience. And I'm using it with clients now and with teams now and with individuals. And I do think it's a common trait that many of us experience is, there's always things in our way, but we don't have to add to them by building those barriers ourselves. We have to get over those self-inflicted limitations.
I'm glad you answered that, because it's like the person who says, if I win the lottery, I'm going to do this, and yet they never buy a ticket.
Absolutely.
And sorry to get political, but when Trump won his first election, the protesters against him, the majority of them didn't even vote in that election. It's kind of like you could have prevented that if that's what you wanted to do by actually voting. So you took action. I love that you identified that this is what I want to do. Then you were so convinced that in what it was, in helping others, and it was your purpose, that you just had to rationalize what the things that were holding you back and say, it's false evidence appearing real. You know, the
Mhm.
fear is false evidence appearing real. And a lot of the time that holds a lot of good people back. Later in life, it's financial commitment is people have financial commitments. They can't just, what was the movie? City Slickers? Yeah, go and find your dream. You know, you just can't do that sometimes. I've got a wife, mortgage, children. Yeah, they're stuck in that rut. But I take my hat off to you to do that. And I'd much rather
Thank you.
work with a coach who has that purpose than somebody who's just in it because it was a good idea. Somebody said, "Oh, there's a good idea to be a business," but it's not really what they want to do. So congratulations to you, Thomas,
Thank you.
on nailing that early and now putting it into action, because as we've said many times in this recording, the dental profession lacks that in education. And so there's
Mm.
probably, sometimes you might have to knock on the same door many times before the dentist goes, you know what, you do make sense. I am trapped in this situation, and I know that I could be better as a dentist, as a someone in my community. There's nothing wrong with success in dentistry. You pay more taxes, so the government makes more money. They can build more roads. You make more money, so you can invest that in your community. You can employ more people. That helps your community. There's nothing wrong with being successful in business. You can
Right.
you can buy nicer things in your house within reason, but success is not a bad thing. And so helping people to say, you know what, I am good at this in dentistry, but I am lacking in this. Can you help me? And mindset is that whole thing that often holds people back. And often, as you said, it's not knowing what that next step is and then saying, well,
Right.
because I don't know, I'll put it to the side.
Right.
You can help them. Mm.
Yeah. One quick thing to say, like I was just talking to another colleague today about the fear or the stigma around not knowing something. I think that's a good thing. If you ask yourself a question or if you have a challenge and the honest answer is I don't know, or I lack the resources to know what to do next. It's more of an objective, opinion lens. That's okay. That gives you information in not knowing something. That then gives you something to focus on, something tangible. Say, okay, great. We identified the gap in knowledge. Now we know exactly what we have to answer. We have to figure out what we're missing. We have to answer these questions that we don't know. Let's figure out who to talk to, what resources we can find, and then identify the information needed to then make that decision. So I think it's a good thing to identify what you don't know, as long as it's not like an internal emotion that you're trying to navigate. But if it's an objective, logical piece of information that you just need to acquire, that gives you homework. That gives you a project to then go after. So I try to find things that, close my knowledge gap because that's tangible. You just have to write it down and figure it out and then move forward.
How do you help your clients then in that same situation where, they have a goal or they feel they have a purpose, but they don't know what that first step is, or if there is a first step, or if they can manage it? How do you help them get started? Because the longest journey begins with the first step, but
Yes.
how do you get them to take that first step?
Yeah. Great point. Most of the time, it's not knowing what the first step is, but there is a step they can take, as small and simple as it can be. And we try to identify what would the easiest step to take. Sometimes it might be just a simple mindset shift, or it might be, I'm going to write something down, or I'm going to create a list of what to do next. I'm going to think about what that first step is. Like that itself is a step, as simple as silly as that sounds. So it's being intentional about wanting to take that first step. And then most of the time, your fears or what you think is going to be in the way doesn't really actually get in your way. It's just kind of the emotion side. That's just kind of putting some blinders on you. So I would say there's always a small step you can take. And generally
Mm.
it's in the moment. It's thinking a different way. It's writing something down. It's make it, your top three priorities down for the rest of the day. Or think of two people that you can pick up your phone and call right now that can give you some answers to questions that you have. Or identify one thing you can do within your team to make a small difference, right? Or identify one question that you want to ask somebody. It's as simple as that, because that just gets it started. And then other steps come after that. But it's a simpler step than most people assume.
You created a valuable piece of information in that answer, and I'm sure you've done it on purpose, because one of the things that stops people is that they get too much information overload of
Mm,
what to do. Not information overload, but overwhelm from tasks. Make a list, and they make a list of 10 things, and then they don't get anything. And so one of the principles of teaching is to teach people to do things in threes only. And then you went to twos, and then you went to one, which is even more powerful. I've got a coach who says, next 6 weeks, just do one thing. In a year, you'll have achieved 8 things. Whereas if I give you a list and you make a list of 8, you won't achieve any of those in a year
right,
because you'll get tied up in yourself. So
right.
really, really important in giving people that, what are we going to achieve between now and next time as a coach, and have that purpose. I'm going to achieve this thing in this time frame. Well, let's get it done and then move on to the next thing.
And make it simple, because that
Mm.
way it's less intimidating. or less overwhelming. It's not as difficult to perceive how am I going to do this one big thing or all of these things. So, what's the simplest action you can take by the end of the day?
Yes. To
Something
get
as
a result.
simple and yeah, and then that just starts the process of thinking, oh, I could set myself a small goal, I could achieve it. Tomorrow's a new day. I'll set another small goal, and then before you know it, enough days go by or a week goes by, and it's like, okay, let me list out a few more things, and then that upward spiral starts to manifest. So
Mm.
it's just getting started.
Yes. And along the way, celebrate those results, celebrate those achievements.
Yes,
And even if the result is not a positive one, there's a learning experience with every
right,
failure, as
right,
Thomas Edison said, as Colonel Sanders said, you know,
yeah,
thousands of learning experiences for them.
yes, yes.
Each one got them to their goal.
One of my favorite quotes is, "There's no failure, only feedback."
Mm.
So there's always something you can learn. So self-reflection is another huge aspect to develop because the more you reflect on everything you have done and do, the more information you gather from that. Again, positive or negative. And I wouldn't think it so much as positive or negative. I would think of, does this help align me to my goal or veer me off the goal? And then all you have to do is just, as you continue on, think back, what worked in my favor, what did not. Focus on what's working, refine what's not working. And you know, be conscious of all those decisions you make, be conscious of all that, the actions you're taking, pay attention to the result and start to track the result because then you're focusing on data. You're not focusing on your emotions or you're not focusing on your feelings and that intimidation piece. Well, look what you did over the last week. You set a small task every day. And look, now you have seven small accomplishments you made. You have information of how they went. Let's do more of that. And it's just
Mm.
replicating habits and actions.
I guess the biggest issue for anybody trying to improve is how can they improve quickly? The results are important. So there's plenty of people, and we discussed this. Library cards are free if you want to go and do all your own research. Or one of the things that I used, phrase that I used, and I reflect on often, is that whenever following somebody's advice, make sure they're headed in the right direction.
Mm,
Whenever taking advice, make sure they're headed in the right direction, and so that you're getting to the result that you want. And often that is not the case. People listen to family about business decisions, and the family's never been in business. If I'd have followed my
good point.
dad's level of risk, then I would have never risked anything to achieve what I had achieved. But I knew that it was possible. I don't know where my level of risk came from, but that's really important. So that again, getting a coach is really, really important because a coach will say, well, I know that this works because it's worked for this client, and this client. Whereas what you're asking me to approve, I know I have not seen that work in any of my clients, and I've seen these results in some of those clients. So again, balanced information as
Mm.
opposed to It's now in 2020. Jump in the car, we put Siri on our Google Maps, and we get her to tell us or him, where we're going and the best way, even though we've done it before, just in case there's a motor vehicle accident or
All the
roadworks
time. Yeah.
all the time. And yet we know the place where we're going, but it also tells us the time frame.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna need to put my foot down here to get there a little bit quicker. But
Right.
we know that. Whereas in the old days, it was kind of like, now you jump in the car and with someone and they go, oh, I know where I'm going. And you put the map on in silent, you watch just in case there was a quicker way. But it's getting that advice, and
Yeah.
the advice that I'm full of quotes today, but one that I live by is, if it has been done, it can be done again. And
Sure.
especially in business, maybe not for me running 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. I can't physically do that. But in business, I can work on a way, or I can find people to help me to achieve that goal because it has been done. Those processes are there. And so a coach is really important in making sure that we don't take the distractions, we don't watch the squirrels, and we do stay focused on doing what we need to do to get to that end result quicker, because
Right.
we all have a finite amount of time on this earth, and I've yet to see a tombstone saying he wished he'd spent more time at the office. It just doesn't happen. We want to get our result and enjoy the fruits of our labor. Thomas, if
Yes.
somebody wants to get in touch with you about the services that you offer, be they a dentist or a business person, struggling with finding their purpose or getting the results that they wish to achieve, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Sure. Two great ways. One, my website has a lot of information on it. It's ascendpropathways.com. And I'm sure you'll find it in the notes here. There's a lot of free resources, tools, frameworks, and programs that I offer. You'll find all of the podcasts and webinars I do. So there's a ton of information there. It's been very intentional. It's a good resource. Secondly, LinkedIn. I'm fairly active on LinkedIn. Just find my link here as well. Send me a message. I'm very responsive, and I'd love to connect with as many people passionate about growth and self-improvement and professional improvement. So I'd love to connect with anyone interested to chat.
You've mentioned at the start that you are working primarily with dentists, but do you work with normal people as well?
Yeah, again, like to the sentiment that we spoke about before, I love to work with anyone. Like I obviously will work with anyone who is interested in self-improvement. I have been in the dental industry nearly 10 years, so that's just kind of the natural network that I'm interacting with. But I am not exclusive to just the dental profession, nor clinical or business owners. So I work with, people in nonprofit. I've worked outside of dental already. I'm hosting some webinars for career development, actually. So there's information there in my website as well for career development. But yeah, I will work with anyone who has a challenge severe enough that they can't solve it on their own. That they know they're going to need a dedicated partner to help guide them through a process to reach the ambitions that they want to reach because they're passionate and they have that purpose behind them.
Lovely. Well, Thomas, thanks very much for being a guest tonight, your time on the Ultimate Dental Podcast. It's been great talking with you and also just seeing, what's out there. A lot of dentists are very focused on clinical only, and yet there's plenty of dentists who do struggle with their purpose. So I hope that those viewers and listeners of this podcast do get in touch with you if they feel that there's a need. And I know that you can help them, that's for sure. Everybody in the dental profession needs help. It's not that they willingly realize that they do, but the path to improvement is a very pleasant one for a lot of people, knowing that we have become a better person as a result of improving ourselves in whatever way. Thomas Passalacqua, thanks again for being on the Ultimate Dental Podcast.
Of course, David, thank you so much. It was great to talk to you. We got some deep topics today, so it was a lot of fun and very meaningful. So I appreciate that, and I hope your audience appreciates it as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you for tuning in to another inspiring episode of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for being a part of our dental community and joining us each week on this incredible journey. If you found value in today's episode and you don't want to miss out on future episodes packed with expert insights and actionable strategies, here's how you can stay connected with us. Firstly, hit that subscribe button. Whether you're listening on your favorite podcast platform or watching on our website, subscribing ensures you'll never miss an episode. Secondly, share the love. If you know a fellow dentist or colleague who could benefit from the wisdom and knowledge that we share here, please share our podcast with them. Also, please share the podcast on your socials by simply clicking on the social icons wherever you view or listen to this podcast. Together, we can all do our bit to elevate the dental profession. And finally, stay engaged with us. We love hearing from you. Your questions, comments, and feedback fuel our mission to provide the best content for your professional growth, your personal growth, and for your practice growth. Remember, your journey to creating a dental practice and a business life that you love is our mission, and we're excited to be your trusted guide along the way. Thank you for being a part of the Ultimate Dental Podcast. Until next time, keep smiling, keep striving, and keep on tuning in to the Ultimate Dental Podcast.